The rivalry between Argentina and the Netherlands simmered for 50 years, until it finally boiled over in the most unexpected place, Qatar. La Albiceleste and the Clockwork Orange had never even faced each other, not even in warm-up friendlies, until they finally crossed paths for the first time in 1974, and from that moment on, they haven't stopped clashing. In the 1974 World Cup in Germany, the Netherlands won. The 1978 final in Argentina went to Argentina. In France 1998, the Europeans came out on top thanks to that iconic goal from Dennis Bergkamp. In Germany 2006, they didn't hurt each other. In the 2014 semi-finals in Brazil, same thing. But Argentina reached the final after penalties. And in Qatar 2022, you already know what happened at the Battle of Lusail. Messi's Riquelme-style celebration, directed at Luis van Gaal. The Netherlands' incredible comeback when all hope seemed lost. Leandro Paredes kicking the ball straight at the Dutch bench. A world record 18 yellow cards and 1 red. Argentina's mocking celebration in the Dutch players' faces after the final penalty. And of course, the official birth of a proper, full-blown rivalry, complete with the kind of magic words that will be echoed for generations to come.
Un poco caliente por el final.
¿Qué mira, bobo? ¿Qué mira, bobo? Anda para allá, bobo. Anda para allá.
In Korean, it's called Johnny Leon. In Japanese, they say Nikaisen. In English, it's known as a rivalry between South Korea and Japan. It all began in 1910, when Japan invaded Korea and occupied it for 35 years. Let's just say Koreans and Japanese have never been friendly. On the football pitch, South Korea was clearly superior throughout the 20th century, so it was hard to call it a true classic. But in the last 25 years the balance has shifted, and don't let any Korean hear me say this, Japan has arguably had a stronger team than Korea for the last decade. There are some explosive combinations in the world. Water and sodium in the kitchen, chlorine and ammonia in the lab, and Brazilians and Uruguayans on a football field. It doesn't matter if it's a club level or national teams, sparks always fly. The Clásico de Rio Negro was born out of the Maracanazo in 1950 and has since seen the South American Giants meet in 7 Copa Libertadores finals, 4 Copa America finals, and countless thrilling semifinals. When Uruguay and Brazil face off, there's never a truce. The fact that Germany and England, the two economic superpowers of Europe, settled their differences in 2 world wars doesn't help when it comes to their football matches being viewed as just another game. Especially not after 1966 World Cup final in England, the one with the controversial goal that, even now nearly 60 years later, is still being debated. Germany got revenge in the 1990 World Cup semi-finals, in the Euro 1996 semis played on English soil, and again in the 2010 World Cup, with another ghost goal, only this time in favor of the Germans. In Africa, there's one match that historically stands above all the rest: Ghana versus Nigeria. Every time they meet, they leave everything on the pitch. It's known as the Jollof Derby, because both nations claim to cook the best jollof rice, a dish that's iconic in both cultures. Unlike most national team rivalries, Ghana and Nigeria don't even share a border, but they do share something else. In a region of Africa where most countries speak French, both Ghana and Nigeria speak English. This shared thread has fueled the rivalry in music, culture, and especially football. Ghana has 35 million, Nigeria? 235 million. But numbers don't matter here. Ghana clearly leads the all-time head-to-head. It's a rivalry marked by 75 years of mostly good-natured banter, stained by a few darker moments, like the mass expulsion of Nigerians from Ghana in 1969, a wound that still hasn't fully healed. Back on the field in their last major clash, Ghana knocked out the Super Eagles in Nigeria during the qualifiers for Qatar 2022. The reaction? Pure chaos. Not just because they missed the World Cup, but because they were eliminated by Ghana. In North Africa, there's another rivalry similar, but far less fun. Egypt and Algeria. Only behind South Africa are the biggest economic powers on the continent, and their matches are always high-risk affairs. Off the field, there's no real animosity between Egyptians and Algerians, but on the pitch, their encounters are the African version of Brazil versus Argentina, identical, over-the-top passion in the stands, just with less talented players on the field. The United States is the most powerful country in the world. Mexico is its neighbor, and can't even come close. In economy, education, infrastructure, military power, basically in any industry. And not in any sport either. Except for one. Soccer. That silly little sport Americans have long disrespected. Historically, Mexico always had the upper hand. But since the 1991 World Cup, everything changed. In the last 35 years, the Americans have dominated most matches, including that painful round of 16 clash in the 2002 World Cup in South Korea and Japan. If that footage doesn't make your stomach turn, then you're probably not Mexican. In 1879, Chile and Peru stopped being allies and faced off in the War of the Pacific. Since then, well, let's just say they haven't exactly been best friends. Fortunately, the war was replaced in the 20th century by the Clásico del Pacífico, a brutal football rivalry filled with as many goals as red cards. Before Colombia rose and Ecuador followed, Chile and Peru were constantly battling for the title of South America's fourth best team, just behind the three World Cup winners. Over the years, the rivalry hasn't cooled, quite the opposite. In 2015, Chile beat Peru 4-3 in Lima, and Claudio Bravo vandalized the walls of the visitors' locker room with a message that still stings: "Respect the champion of America was here." 2 years later, Peru qualified for the World Cup. Chile didn't, and the Peruvian players made sure everyone knew it. In football language, there's a saying: there's no such a thing as a friendly match between Mexico and the United States. Same goes for Brazil-Uruguay, same for Germany-England. But let's be real, it's just a saying. As intense as the matches may get, they're often just glorified scrimmages. But when it comes to Saudi Arabia versus Iran, this is not a metaphor. There are literally no friendlies between them. In the last 30 years, both countries have qualified for nearly every World Cup. They're the footballing and military powers of the Persian Gulf. Yet they only face each other when absolutely forced to. The diplomatic tension between the two nations has never allowed for a simple phone call or email to arrange a warm-up match. Arabs and Persians, Sunnis and Shiites. They faced off just 14 times in history, 9 in World Cup qualifiers, 4 in the AFC Asian Cup, and once in the Olympics. Saudi Arabia versus Iran is not a rivalry that knows friendlies. So far, we've seen that a national team rivalry can be rooted in geopolitical tension, like the border between Chile and Peru. It can be purely political, like Saudi Arabia versus Iran, or it can be built entirely on football grudges, like Argentina versus Netherlands. Now, Germany versus the Netherlands checks every single box. That's why it's one of the most complete rivalries out there. Border, they're neighbors. War, the bitterness began with Germany's World War II occupation of the Netherlands. Football and history? Think of the iconic 1974 World Cup final, where the Dutch favorites lost to the host, only to get revenge at Euro 88 in the semi-finals, celebrating with absurd, borderline grotesque antics. And in the 1990 World Cup, Frank Rijkaard used Rudy Boller's luscious curls like a public restroom sink. That's how one of Europe's biggest rivalries was fully sculpted. There's no rivalry between these two nations more intense than Argentina versus England. Once again, the regions are political, and football just added fuel to the fire. In the 1982 Falkland War, the United Kingdom crushed Argentina. 4 years later, at the Estadio Azteca, Diego Armando Maradona scored two of the most famous goals in football history. Maybe the two most famous goals ever. But even before the war, there was already bad blood. In 1966, England and Argentina met in a controversial World Cup quarter-final. Argentina felt robbed after their captain Antonio Ratin was sent off and refused to leave the field. 32 years later, in France 1998, it was David Beckham who got sent off after falling for a trap set by Diego Simeone. Bottom line? Every time England and Argentina play, something historic happens, and that's why this is a true, undisputed classic. The oldest rivalry in football belongs to the two teams that played the very first match ever, back in 1872, England and Scotland. Through centuries of war and conquest, England has stripped Scotland of its autonomy. All Scotland has left now is a sovereign football team, and the pitch is the only place where Scots can dream of beating a foe they can't defeat in real life. That, my friends, is why the stats of this rivalry are so shockingly close. 49 wins for England, 41 for Scotland, and 26 draws. The most recent, a 0-0 in Euro 2020 at Wembley, which tasted like pure glory for the Scots. In fact, up until the 1980s, meaning the first 100 years of this rivalry, Scotland was the dominant side. But since 1986, it's all gone downhill. In football, only one fixture can match the global magnitude and historical weight of El Clásico, the Super Clásico of the Americas, Brazil versus Argentina, two ultra-powerful national teams with a pathological level of parity. Argentina has 43 wins, Brazil has 42, and they've drawn 26 times. The most remembered match for Argentinians? Probably the 1990 World Cup round of 16, when they not only beat Brazil, but allegedly gave Branco poisoned water. That moment still warms Argentine hearts as much as their 3 World Cups, and helps them to forget that Brazil has 2 more.